Okay, hello everybody. I can see that we've got a few people on the call. Thanks to those that have joined, and welcome to this, the third and sort of final of this three-part webinar series between myself, Carla at Wealthbrite, and my good friends at Thrive Law. Hopefully you know that you're here to join us to talk about what employers need to know about neurodiversity and finances. We've been exploring a lot about the links between diversity and finances over the course of the last few months. And yeah, if you've missed the previous ones, keep an eye out because we will share recordings of our other sessions after this one's been completed. I'm seeing there's a few more people join, but I'm also conscious of time. It's 33 minutes past 12 now. So I think maybe let's make a start, Laura. What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. Now, welcome to everyone today. So just as a brief introduction, I'm one of the senior associate solicitors at Thrive Law. Yeah, hopefully we've got a number of people who've attended the previous webinars. And today you may have noticed a slight change of face because my lovely colleague Alicia is actually away on maternity leave, having had a baby recently. But I'm very happy to join you today, Carla.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I'm sure people are probably bored of looking at my face, but I'm Carla. For those that don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO of Wealthbrite. We're a financial education company really on a mission to kind of transform the way we think, talk and act when it comes to all things financial, health, literacy and well-being in the workplace. And so yeah, great to be wrapping up this series today with Laura. So we've got about 40 minutes left together today. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to what we cover, and then we're going to crack on and get through it so we can make sure we've got time to answer all of your lovely questions, should you have them. We're going to start first and foremost by asking and answering the question of what is neurodiversity? I'm sure a lot of you will have read or seen, there's been quite a lot of press around the question about neurodiversity, both in school settings and in workplaces of late. But we're going to kind of really just make sure that we're all clear on what it is and what it looks like, what it means. Laura's going to lead us through, I think, the foundational and really important legal framework that folks need to be aware of on when neurodiversity may amount to a disability, and of course what that means if you are an employer, because that will bring additional legal obligations. And then I'm going to take us through some of the data that exists around understanding the link between neurodivergence and financial behaviours. And then, as we normally do, we'll end with what that all means, practically speaking, for employers and what you can be thinking about doing now to be proactive and what are some best practices that you can be adopting in the workplace to really support those who are neurodivergent. And then hopefully we'll have time to answer any questions that you have at the end of the session. But before we get going, and you'll have to bear with us, we've had some technical glitches this morning, but we really wanted to get a slider going. We've had to make do with dropping the QR code in the chat. So if I can encourage you to get your phones out and head over to the chat and scan that QR code. We'd love to just start with a quick question on understanding how confident you are on a scale of 1 to 10 on understanding the link between neurodiversity and finances. And I think hopefully Roshni or Laura will guide us on like how the answers are coming out. But the reason we asked this question, and we'll be asking it again at the end of the session, it's a really good way to take a pulse check on where folks are at in terms of that strength of understanding and knowledge. Great, thanks Roshni for sharing the link. For those that don't have their phone to hand, you can click on this link and it should open in a new tab. But we also make sure that you have an opportunity to answer this question again at the end of the session, and it should hopefully be that you have increased in your knowledge. And if you haven't, that suggests that we haven't answered some questions or something that you wanted to know about. And so I'd encourage you to use that as a prompt to kind of interrupt and ask us questions at the end if you don't feel you've increased your knowledge. How are we looking on responses? Can Laura or Roshni give us a heads up?
We've got 6 responses.
Amazing. So we're getting some responses. And where's it coming out in terms of like the average level of response?
Between 2 and 6.
2 and 6. Oh wow. Is there like an average amongst all the answers? 2 and 6 is quite a wide range. So it means we've got a mix of knowledge base in the room.
Mostly 2s.
Mostly 2s. Okay. All right. Well, then in which case, I hope this is a really valuable session for you all, because certainly on our side, she's going to share some really good quality information for us now. So on that note, Laura, I'm going to hand over to you. Is that the right slide for you?
Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So let's start. I mean, I'm mindful, and that's really interesting actually to get everyone's feedback on their confidence levels, because I was really mindful. There's obviously been a lot of increased discussion in a very positive way about neurodiversity more broadly, and certainly in terms of some specific neurodiverse conditions as well. Mindful that our knowledge is going to be based on people's lived experiences. It might be a sort of general awareness. It might have been challenges you may have come across in the workplace, not quite sure how to deal. There is a wealth of information out there, and obviously want to qualify where that comes from. Hopefully medical professionals and people with lived experience are always really good people to engage that conversation with and increase our understanding. But I think traditionally, when we talk about neurodiversity, it refers to that community of people who are neurodivergent and who have neurodiverse conditions, and most commonly, and we can mainly hear that in terms of ADHD, for example, or dyslexia. Now, it's a much wider and broader range beyond that in terms of neurodiverse conditions. And it's a differing way in terms of how our cognitive behaviour is and how our brains process things. It's not to say that anyone is better or worse at doing things. I think it's a case of understanding how that individual thinks and processes things. And, you know, some people, there's been a lot of conversation about labelling, for example, and some people will, it's an integral part of that person. Some people will say, I am dyslexic, or I have dyslexia. Some people, there's pros and cons in terms of how they want to describe themselves, but I say broadly that's what it will cover in terms of anyone who's not neurotypical, those neurodiverse conditions. And personally, I hate the term condition, but it's that's commonly how it's referred to. And I think in the context of working environments, what we seem to find, can I just check my slides? Can people see the text on here? Is it popping up, Carla?
So I'm seeing the one that says neurodiversity in red. Do you want me to move them on?
Oh yeah, it should have moved them along there.
For some reason it hasn't. So do you want challenges in the workplace?
Yes, that's the one there. It should be sharing.
I think for some reason I've got control over the slides. I think that might be because I started the session. So
yes, thank you.
So I'll move them along. You can just prompt me.
Okay, as long as the content popping up there within it.
Hopefully now everybody can see all of the different challenges in the workplace, because I've kind of flicked through.
That's super. Thanks, Carla. I'll let you drive. Good old tech. I love a bit of Teams presenting.
Sorry, I don't think that anyone can see it. It's just showing challenges in the workplace.
On my end, let's see. Laura, do you want to try?
Yeah, I'm clicking through there, but it's not really.
Is it working?
I do apologise, everyone.
Yeah,
people are getting a blank screen. That's unfortunate.
Sophie, are you still seeing a blank screen? Can you give me a thumbs up if yes?
Oh dear. Okay, well let's
blank screen still.
Blank screen still. Right, I do apologise for this, guys. Okay, well let's walk through. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate they're not showing that. And what we can do, we can always share a we navigate forward in the slides. Right, so and thank you, Tiffany, for commenting. So if you navigate forward in the slides, So if you can do that, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for confirming. So yeah, if not, I'd say we can circulate if anyone's missing any information. But essentially, the purpose of popping this slide up was, I think this is the area, especially in the employment context, of what we seem to focus on. So what challenges is somebody up against? I think commonly that's how sometimes they'll come to the fore. So when we're advising organisations, sometimes because there is no legal obligation for an individual to disclose any form of medical condition, for various personal reasons, someone might not want to, whether it's culturally, they don't feel they're able to open and speak up, whether they don't wish to, whether they concerned about raising that. And that's one thing we'd always encourage you to have, is a very open culture where you don't have that issue. But sometimes we have employers coming to us saying this individual either behaviourally or there's performance concerns, they're not doing X, Y, and Z. And then through the process of investigating that matter, we then discover, or the individual discloses, that they actually are neurodiverse. So where we will see some challenges is in people's organisations. So, for example, being late, if they're struggling with that time management, in terms of memory. There we are, I can see it. In memory, someone might need more prompts for things. So, people who are dyslexic, for example, they may struggle cognitively with memory and recall. I myself am dyslexic, so I know this myself. So I have tactics and tips that I use to prompt myself at times. In terms of processing, so certainly a big conversation, something we're doing very much at Thrive this year, is accessibility of documents, policies, information in the workplace, to make sure that it's digestible and understandable for everybody. While there's often a legal basis for these things, it's always very important that it translates into human and common language. Focus and concentration is something we see commonly. So, for example, individuals who have ADHD, in terms of their ability to concentrate on particular tasks, reading and writing, we mentioned dyslexia there, or dyspraxia. Impulse control. So in terms of communication, you might see something come through in terms of the way people communicate. And this is a really big one, actually, and a common one, is sensory issues. So often people who are neurodivergent will have sensitivities to lighting in the office, for example, or sound. We commonly talk about this with employers in terms of considering your recruitment practices as well. So what kind of room are you? You're trying to get the best out of someone. You're trying to assess someone for a role. What is the environment you're putting them into to make sure that they feel comfortable and able to participate to their fullest extent in these kinds of things. And certainly with regard to sound as well. I know I've worked in offices before where there's been soundproofing, and it's the hum, and I do think it's the air conditioning, but actually it's the soundproofing making it quite common actually in more modern buildings. And as I say, people who are neurodivergent may be more sensitive to that. So it's considering the environment. And as I say, these are some of the challenges that they will face, not only in the work environment, just generally in terms of managing themselves as well. So let's try and click on to the next thing. So actually on the flip side of thing, and there is actually positively an increasing conversation we'll see online about strengths in the workplace. So there's a number, so Richard Branson for one, for example, there's a number of CEOs of really large companies who've really seen huge success, who really do promote the strengths that actually neurodivergent individuals can bring to the workplace. So for example, creativity, if they are more visual, and certainly the way their brain processes things, they can bring creative methodology that we haven't thought about before in terms of strategic planning as well. Problem solving, they'll have a different way of approaching things. So I think having that mixture across your workforce is a really positive thing, to have that input, and also considering things from their point of view that you might not have done before. They can often feel very passionately if they are more, and that sometimes will type in with hyper focus as well. So colleagues who individuals who may be ADHD, for example, they will have periods of hyper focus when they really can zone in and actually really churn through quite a hefty piece of work and really focus on and get really good outputs when they're given that time and they have the right environment to be able to thrive and do that. And thinking outside the box, I think, in every workplace, regardless of whether we're neurotypical or neurodivergent, having that breadth and variance in thought and contributions to any strategy or just generally in the workplace in terms of feedback for anything you're looking to implement is a really positive thing. And I can often be empathetic because they have faced challenges and they have more awareness of things. You can often find that these individuals are empathetic as well and have a strong sense of fairness. And again, because of the challenges and the coping strategies that they may have developed, or indeed, we hear a lot of people who are having later diagnoses in life, and they've actually been what we call masking, so actually dealing and coping with their condition up to that point. Now, in many respects, that's not necessarily a positive thing, but once they receive a diagnosis and support, because they have gone through what they've gone through, and because mentally it's really quite challenging, it can be quite draining actually, that it does create that resilience. So as you can see, there's a huge array of strengths that these neurodivergent individuals can bring. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if we didn't cover the legal bits, but it is, we need to consider when neurodivergence may amount to a disability, and why is this important? So as you may already know, individuals who are classed as disabled, so they have protection against less favourable treatments in the workplace. We need to consider any provision criteria in our practice we're putting in place where someone may be at a disadvantage if they have a medical condition or disability that may give rise to an indirect discrimination claim, and any treatment that they're treated unfairly because of something connected with that disability as well, that could give rise to a claim. Now, I know a lot of individuals think, oh gosh, this is a bit of a minefield, but if we have the right culture, the right practices, and we're giving the proper consideration to things when we are preparing policies, for example, or taking action in the workplace, provide the levels of support we provide, which Carla will come on to discuss shortly as well, then obviously you'll be in a really safe place. But essentially, disability is a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial long-term adverse effect on the ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities, and that can include mental health conditions and neurological conditions, depending on the impact it has on that individual. It's something which someone has suffered from, would like to suffer from for more than 12 months. That makes it a longer-term condition, and we need to consider the cumulative effects of their conditions in terms of how it impacts them, and have through case law determined it's more than minor or trivial effect, so it can be quite wide-ranging. And we also need to consider those conditions are progressive and may get worse. So one thing that's really important, especially those who are employers or in HR roles, is just making sure we're considering not just the activities at work, but how a condition impacts somebody outside of work as well. It's their day-to-day activities, it's how they generally function and get around that's going to be taken into account there, as well as something qualifies as a disability. And what are our obligations in this respect? So legally, if somebody does have a medical condition or mental health condition that does classify as a disability, we need to be making reasonable adjustments. Someone can bring a claim against an employer if they don't do. And what this means is thinking about, like we mentioned earlier, about the environment someone's working in, basically putting them in the best position possible to carry out their role. We want to try and level the playing field, and certainly when when these things do come to light in terms of performance management procedures, we want to make sure that individual has a fair opportunity to actually carry out their role. So it makes your life a lot easier when we're determining what's truly performance related that they might need training, support and guidance with, and what actually is something that requires reasonable adjustments to help them in light of their medical condition. And it needs to be genuinely reasonable, and that's, again, it's quite a broad test. It's quite a pragmatic test in terms of considering your organisation, what you're able to do and reasonably can do to support that individual. And what's really important here, and sometimes we find when we're advising employers can be quite fearful, is asking, speak to the individual. Don't try and guess or do your research, or just solely rely on medical occupational health reports or GP reports can be an incredibly helpful starting point because they have that medical knowledge. But don't forget to talk about the individual concerned with it as well and get their input. It truly is a blend of both. And something we get, especially because, again, there's this wider conversation with neurodivergent conditions, as we have individuals when we think, I think I've got this, I'm telling you I've got this, but I've diagnosed myself with this from stuff I've read online. it's important here to be supportive and encourage them to speak to, have they spoken to their GP, encourage them to do so. We know, unfortunately, at the moment, how long it can take to get assessments. It's sometimes, some cases it's years. It's really not great at all. But have a think about what information do you have. Why this is really important, key and important is if they have a medical condition is going to classify as disability, what's taken into account as an employer, as an employer, we're on notice essentially the person has that condition. So our behaviour and conduct with that individual will then be important beyond that. And actually the courts and tribunals are very quick to impart knowledge and employer that you should have known, you had enough information to know that individual had this condition, and you should have supported or not treated them in that way as a result, which can obviously we can give rise potentially to a claim. So hopefully that's a helpful starting point. As I say, we'll do a job. We didn't cover the legal bit, but I know it's probably some of the dry piece. Over to you
No,
now, Carla.
thank you, Laura. Over the course of these webinars, if you've kind of joined us throughout them, I feel like I've learned an awful lot around this kind of what arguably is a fairly, like, on one hand, the legal tests, are there in plain sight. We have the Equalities Act. It's been around for a while. We have a body of case law that supports it. But equally, it's kind of like, I know a lot of people say it's a sort of tricky for employers in terms of kind of managing some of the nuances as these types of situations for people on an individual level might kind of show themselves in the workforce. And folks might feel like they're trying to, that it can feel like a bit of a guessing game. And I think one of the things I've definitely taken away from this entire series around the legal framework is two things: that piece about ask, don't guess. I think data is increasingly important in the context of people and kind of thinking through kind of like your people strategy and how you treat your employees, but also being mindful and aware of who your people are beyond simply a name and what their job titles are. And then I think the second piece for me that I've really taken from that sort of legal side of the equation is just the piece about, like, do you know or ought to have known based on the circumstances that present themselves to you with regard to the relevant individual? So yeah, thanks, Laura. Okay, so I'm going to turn now, and sorry, I've sorted out the tech. That was entirely my fault. I hadn't realized I hadn't selected the control button when I shared them earlier. So sorry for that little hiccup at the beginning, but I'm glad you can all see the screen now. I want to turn now to what we know and what the data points are around the links between neurodiversity and finances. And I want to start by saying that there isn't a huge amount of data in the UK, but what we do have, comes from, in part, research that the Money and Pension Service has conducted as part of their a really huge and wide-ranging adult financial capability study that was done back in 2018, which of course is a little bit old now, but that's the I think kind of basically the gold standard in terms of like our national appreciation and understanding around financial literacy levels and also markers of financial well-being. And what that shows us, particularly within the context of disability, and this is something that I, again, over the course of these webinars have found to have quite a profound effect on me and my understanding, is that our data shows that every single legally protected characteristic that exists, so all of those pieces that we've covered in the course of the webinars that we've been doing in the last few months, data statistically shows that they bear a negative influence on adult financial well-being. So to put it another way, those that come from a more diverse or background or have a disability or are women or, all the various different elements of what make up those legally protected characteristics in the Equality Act are unfortunately in the UK less financially resilient and I guess more vulnerable to sort of poor financial well-being. And I think if there's nothing else that you guys take away from all these sessions we do, that is the thing I'd love for you to just like hold on to and recognize and reflect on. So it's actually quite powerful. Now, what actually interestingly has been done since this 2018 report is that just in the last year, researchers at MAPS actually they went back into the data set that was pulled together in 2018, and they basically looked at the cohort of individuals who declared themselves to be having a disability, and they went and dug a little deeper into that data and said, well, how many of those people had a cognitive disability as compared to a physical disability? And was there any difference in terms of their financial well-being, like how important or less important was one type of disability as compared to another? And the results were actually very clear that cognitive disability was more likely to have a negative impact on your financial well-being than physical disability. And of course, cognitive disability is a huge that's a really catch-all phrase that will encompass a wide range of neurological conditions. But within that will be those that are neurodivergent. And so it's, I guess, interesting again to recognize that, there's almost this compounding effect that's being seen in the data, that if you are disabled, you are more likely to be suffering with poorer financial well-being, and actually those neurological or neurodiverse individuals will themselves be maybe at times, this is obviously not true for everyone, but the data would suggest that they're statistically more likely to be less financially resilient and less financially confident than compared to other disabled peers. A couple of, obviously, it's not the only factor that's influencing those behaviours. It's important to recognise that there will be regional variations between people's lived experiences and household variations dependent on their levels of earnings and on all those myriad of factors. But what the data was able, or the research was able to demonstrate, was that taking away those variations, you could still see that there was this distinction to draw between those with cognitive disability as compared to physical disability. And something I really latched on in the research and the report was that those that were less than 45 years of age required more support than those who were older. And there seemed to be some suggestion that those that were younger and at earlier stages of their career were particularly struggling with some of these things. And I guess you might say, okay, well, struggling, how does this show up? What are the sort of behaviours? And again, we don't have loads of research on this in the UK, but one very useful report we do have is a paper and a survey that was done by Monzo Bank in collaboration with YouGov. And this was done a couple of years ago, so it's a lot more recent in terms of its appreciation of how people are living and experiencing financial issues. Apologies, I'm just excuse me, managed to pick up the lurgy that's going around. And at this time, actually, Monzo was really motivated to look specifically at ADHD and how folks with ADHD were managing when it came to money. And again, caveat with all of this, we can't paint everyone with the same brush. So when we look at this data and we consider the outputs, we need to bear in mind that this was done in the context of only those who have ADHD as opposed to other neurodivergent conditions. But I think, the data is pretty telling. And I think it's, excuse me, interesting to note that those behaviours, so some of those challenges as well as the strengths that Laura referenced earlier, show up very clearly in the way folks experience managing money. So, when it comes to concentration, when it comes to being able to stay on top of admin and some of those emotional, maybe they at times might have a sort of dysregulation of emotions. All of that was played out when it came to how they manage their personal finances. So you'll see here on this screen, if you had ADHD, you were 4 times more likely to frequently impulse spend. It's those dopamine hits that folks will know about. I think we can all relate to that. You don't have to be neurodivergent to kind of have an appreciation of how we've probably all been there, scrolling online, and you see something and you're tempted to click through, right? And you might not buy on day one, but you'll get annoying emails from the retailer that says, hey, you left something in your basket, right? And the fact of the matter is that folks with ADHD are just more likely to be kind of pulled into those sort of environments and be tempted to spend. They are, as a result, more likely to struggle with debt and problem debt. Their condition can lend itself towards heightened anxiety. And, you know, that is a factor that a lot of working adults in the UK struggle with. So, you know, we do a lot of work looking at particularly those within the legal profession. And, you know, our statistics would show that there's significantly high levels of stress and anxiety experienced by people in work at the beginning of their careers, but actually all the way through their careers when it comes to just their financial circumstances. And I think it's important for folks to be alive to this heightened levels of anxiety with those with ADHD. And then lastly is just this point around that they may be more likely to miss bills or payments. Now, one of the interesting things that did also come out of this research was just like the feeling that folks sort of talked about, because there was quantitative research done and qualitative research as well. And on the qualitative side, there was a lot of feedback. Obviously, Monzo had a vested interest in this, being a bank that was looking to provide better services for its customers. But they really dug into, well, what is it that we can be doing as an organization to better support you and to ensure that you kind of get an environment within our app or when you interact with our people that's kind of going to be more helpful and an enabler of positive financial management rather than something that sort of prevents or creates hurdles. And for a lot of people, it came down to the way in which they can interact, they can consume information, and the level of friction or lack of friction in the system that they were looking for. And I'm going to come back to some of this stuff whenever we get on to what does that maybe mean for you. But I want to just like zoom out a wee bit or come back to, well, what does this all mean for you guys? Well, you know, touched on some of those challenges that folks may have who are neurodivergent. And like, you know, when Laura and I have been talking and prepping for this session, one of the things I really like, again, wanted to highlight for people is that I think oftentimes when we talk about data, it's really quite easy, or maybe it's just sort of easy to go, well, that's extrinsic data. You know, it's someone else. It's not necessarily the problems in my organization, or, you know, it doesn't maybe feel as relatable or close because you don't see it necessarily in your own environments. And I kind of love these kind of these stats on this screen, because what it tells me is that undoubtedly, without a shadow of a doubt, based on the percentage of employees that are neurodivergent and reporting, you know, kind of like less than excellent experiences in the workplace, that you definitely have folks in your business who are kind of going through this and living with these kind of challenges. So yeah, so Laura, I think you were gonna oh no, this was me, was it? So yes, before we go, and I can see some folks are sort of tapping away. If you do have questions, please feel free to pop them in. We'll make sure we get to them at the end. Don't feel shy about, you know, I won't interrupt myself, but don't feel shy about dropping them in there, because if I can see them, it'll prompt my thoughts. So go ahead and ask questions if you have them. I guess the question then became, in my mind, okay, so there's one which is baseline level. How do you know? What do you do if you think or suspect someone might be neurodivergent? How do you go about assessing that first and foremost? And I can see Lisa has asked a question on that directly. So, and also Scott. So I'm going to let you think about them and we'll come back to them at the end. But then I think kind of like then adding on that layer, well, how would I as an employer be able to ascertain or kind of have an inkling that someone might be struggling when it comes to their personal finances and maybe having some deeper issues where actually it's important well, maybe we want to support them, and we want to create an environment where they feel that they can ask for help if they need it. So a few indicators that you may want to just keep an eye out for, and of course these are not automatically a signal of neurodivergence and financial problems. In fact, many of these may be signs of problematic financial behaviours for neurotypical individuals as well. But it's a useful framework that you can use. So first of all, that request for changes to pay or access to earned wages. I'm aware of a lot of businesses who are utilizing schemes where people can kind of like tap into earned wages before their traditional pay date. You'll remember that I said that one of the things that neurodivergent individuals kind of profess is that tendency towards impulse spending and missing bill payments, and kind of not feeling as readily able to keep up with the kind of day-to-day requirements of the administration side of their money. So this might be an indication that actually someone's struggling, they're maybe feeling a bit underwater. And if you do see those repeat questions or repeat requests, I guess it's up to every employer to kind of consider like how they approach that conversation. It needs to be a sensitive one, but I think it's like having a system in place where, what are the red flag moments? At what stage do you go back and have a conversation with that person to say, is everything okay? I think opting out of pensions in favour of higher take-home immediate pay is something we should be considering more widely within organisations, but again, in the context of neurodivergent individuals who are, maybe in that stage of in that situation where they're dealing with problem debt, and so just try to basically keep their head above water. And a really important one for me, and it taps into what Laura was saying earlier about, the accessibility of the resources and support they actually do provide, because a lot of businesses already have a wealth of information, support services, they're doing all the right things, but for those folks in their business who are neurodivergent, it may be that they're actually just less able to engage effectively with what you're already doing, because it's all, you've got to click through multiple links to find it on a company portal. It's all in static, like written language, rather than in a more engaging, maybe multi-format delivery model. Something we hear a lot of in Wealthbrite is, particularly for those at the start of their career, is that desire for a more interactive experience around the topic of finances, right? That perhaps we're having more in-person conversations and role modeling from leaders and intergenerational conversations. And all of those things, will help and kind of and encourage you to have a more diverse range of access points for folks, and that's going to help for those who maybe don't necessarily chime with just that classic written email model. Interestingly, if you didn't already see, the Financial Conduct Authority earlier this year issued a statement out to pension providers on how to best engage employees in taking up pensions. And one of the things they said is that like email prompts aren't really working. We need to find another way. And it sounds simple and obvious, but of course we've all got email fatigue. We're all very busy people. We have hundreds of emails in our inboxes every day, and therefore, if you're just sending emails, likelihood is that a lot of people may not be picking that up. And then I guess slightly more problematic behaviours that you may be witnessing in the workplace are maybe misuse of company credit cards, popping expenses on there that aren't kind of within line with your policies, or overclaiming on expenses for things that sort of on face value look like they're in line with your policy. And the last one, which Laura and I have talked about because I'm aware of folks who are neurodivergent who have been in this situation, is actually turning down promotions. And that's partly because of a perception or a real sense that they would struggle to keep up with the increased demands of the promotion. But of course, that has a significant impact on their finances, because it's going to impact their take-home pay and their prospects for like career and salary progression. So I think just being mindful of all of those things as you kind of move through your engagement with people. I'm conscious of time. Do you want to just maybe do you want to answer the questions, Laura? Because I'm conscious.
Yeah, I was going to say,
to this slide anyway.
That's well, we're really sort of, as I dovetails really nicely from what Carla was saying there in terms of some of the challenges and what we can do to support those. And actually it ties into some extent to Lisa's question as well. I know it's more specific than that, we can go on to that, but as a really good groundwork and starting point is to, we talk about being an inclusive leader. And this can go beyond, people with disabilities or who are neurodivergent, in terms of using inclusive language across your organisation, which respects gender, race, and all other aspects of diversity. So avoiding stereotypes and anything that might be considered to be an offensive remark. In terms of feedback and improvement, so I think that's always a huge thing. Don't always assume, and it's really, it's so quick and easy these days to do stuff. Surveys, they can be anonymous to try and encourage engagement as well. And I think if your team know that you're listening to them and want to have that feedback, then what you'll find is actually people start coming to you with their fresh ideas, which can be really positive. Or if they're feeling challenged in any way, or they need additional support, again, equally, they're open with you and coming to you, hopefully with a view to getting resolution before things can develop into a wider issue, or even they decide, I can't cope it here, I'm going to leave, and then you lose a really good employee. So I think seeking feedback and and being clear about your inclusivity efforts and making the changes that making adjustments that based on that staff input as well. Cultivating diversity generally in terms of your team, and then really importantly, leading by example. So I think if you can, as a leader, can demonstrate inclusive behaviour by your own actions, interactions, that will spread, and it will be able to be a role model for your team. And also, I think what's important, listen, it's always very challenging, especially for those in the call who may be business owners or leaders. You're running a business, you've got the pressures of dealing with that. But I think it's really important to show empathy. So if someone's coming to you or is experiencing challenges, it's again ties into about active listening as well as listening and understanding that. And is there any, how can we work together to support? And really, it's all about getting the best out of that individual, which will improve productivity, but will improve staff engagement and your quite frankly business reputationally as well, to be a good place to work, and hopefully being approachable. So we always sort of joke about the bosses being the corner officers, that we dare not knock on that door. But actually, if you are being seen to be open and encouraging that engagement, that's only going to be a positive thing. And then moving on to Lisa's question there, hopefully this will give good groundwork with someone can be forthcoming. But I know you've expressed that there might not be a diagnosis with the individual themselves. It might be something from your experience you pick up on with someone. You think, actually, I think there might be neurodivergent. I think how that's coming to light is going to be the starting point for that conversation. So whether it's behaviourally, whether it's a piece of work they've carried out that you notice thinking, actually, I think that's showing traits of, for example, dyslexia. I think it's being gentle, and we're tied with that empathy piece, but having the conversation, like, I've noticed this. Is there any further we can do to support? Is this something you do tend to struggle with? What do you think might help? So, for example, if it is something that someone's struggling with in terms of their writing capabilities, there's software, there's voice recognition software that can translate things very quickly, and that can simply help and support. So I think rather than saying, I think you might be, you might have ADHD or you might be dyslexic, I think it's broaching the challenge they're facing, and hopefully through that, it might be something, if someone does open up and say, well, actually, I don't really want to face it, but I have been thinking I might need to I might be struggling with this, and I haven't got a diagnosis. We can support and encourage that, and that will only help you to inform them. They feel supportive, and hopefully work out a way we can make appropriate adjustments to support them in the workplace. So I hope that's helpful in answering that one.
Add to that, to just say, I think there's also an opportunity for businesses to just get into a better practice and habit of collecting data and making it part of general kind of company-wide kind of employee surveys or NPS scores.
Absolutely.
But actually, getting into that person habit. We talked on the last webinar, which was about socioeconomic status, about the fact that not all of these signs or signals that people are, from a more diverse kind of background and lived experience are legally protected. But it doesn't stop you from asking well-crafted questions as part of your data gathering exercises in your organizations to kind of collect that information. And then again, it's not about necessarily singling someone out or pointing the finger, but it gives you different type of data that to then be able to act on, and you can kind of maybe bring in programs or tools or systems in a way that's accessible for everybody, but then it's going to be helpful for that targeted audience.
Absolutely.
I know we're struggling on time here, but I want to really look at Scott's question as well, and then I'd love to touch on some of the ways you can support equity from a financial well-being standpoint as well. But Scott, I think essentially you had two questions, but one was like, what do folks who are neurodiverse, what should they be doing in the context of interviews and employer conversations right at the start of their careers? I'll give my 2 cents and then hand over to the expert. My personal opinion is that you should be being honest and upfront about your needs, because your employer should be, if they're on notice of that requirement, they should be asking if you need any reasonable adjustments in the course of the interview. They may be asking you about like how you handle or manage in certain circumstances. And I think the earlier you can be honest and upfront about it, the more equipped your employer will be to then provide you with the best support to succeed in that role. Laura, I don't know if you...
Yeah, no, I would be hoping, yeah, so what we've mentioned there about, previously about there's no legal obligation to disclose a medical condition, but and also we have to be careful about how in-depth questions we might ask of someone who's applying for a role. But a really obvious question, this applies to everybody: is there anything we can do to support you in the interview process? It's a simpler question as that. And that gives the opportunity for someone to say, well, look, we mentioned earlier about the environment and, where you're interviewing, not having this bright white room with very bright lights, isn't, going to, that may cause stress and anxiety, or someone who is has a neurodivergent condition might struggle with. Then in terms of, you said there about people wanting specifically time as an organisation in a role, what I would really hope for is, obviously you're applying for a very specific job there, and I think it's a strength, it's what's going to be needed to actually carry that specific job, because some jobs that there aren't, you can be more flexible. Now, some things where it requires someone sat at that seat at a particular time to cover that. So say, for example, it was a security guard, and we need somebody in that post and there on time. If someone's going to struggle with their timekeeping, that might be actually not the best environment or role for that individual, and they may accept that themselves. But if there's ways in which you can be open and say, well, look, these are my strengths, this is what I really think I can bring to the role, but I may struggle with, I need some flexibility with this, and this is for why. It just prompts that open conversation. Say, actually, is this going to be something that the employer may be able to adapt to or support with? And certainly in terms of organisation, there's methods and strategies and ways in which information can be managed, delivered in that role. So actually, it's a slight adaptation, but it's part of that, as Carla mentioned earlier, it's that conversation. And what I would hope is that you can have that. But I completely understand. And people we're the worst for it in terms of imposter syndrome and thinking, oh, they're not going to want me because, but actually I tie back to those strengths and what you can bring, and hopefully you'll be able to focus on those, because there truly are positives that an individual can bring to a role.
Now, Scott, I know you've asked the second question. If I may, I'll suggest that we might reach out to you individually and be aligned on some of your other questions. But I just wanted to close the session briefly by kind of reflecting back on this interconnectivity between neurodivergence and financial behaviours, because that's what we're here to talk about today. So I guess like proactive strategies that you can be adopting as an employer to support those who have neurodivergence in this context is, first of all, asking yourself the question, do you have a policy on how to support employees in difficulty? I'd like to believe that you all do, because you'll all be mindful of those obligations in the context of disability framework, but you might also want to have a specific policy around neurodivergence and the spectrum of neurodivergence and how it might appear in your workforce. I think secondly, it comes back to that like adjustments that you can be making in terms of ensuring that folks can access information within the organization as it relates to their pay and their rewards and other support mechanisms you may have in place, like an EAP system, or maybe you have other financial wellbeing resources already. Are they diverse enough to ensure that folks can like really access them easily? And then really going above and beyond that, I'd love to see folks like really actually taking the time to train mental health first aiders and managers, who are often the first line of defense in these kind of environments, on understanding that link between neurodivergence and finance. I think, it's important to ensure that folks who may be the first to see these signals kind of are alert and aware to the issues. And then we've touched on already about the data aspect and what you can be doing to kind of signal internally that you are working to ensure that folks of all varieties of diversity have access to what's on offer. If before you go, you might be able to, Roshni, can you drop the QR code and the link in again? But we'd love to just retest how confident you feel on a scale of 1 to 10. If you do have time, we'd love to just get that quick snapshot before you go. It's really helpful for us to ensure that you've taken something positive away from the session. And then I just want to give, whilst you're doing that, I want to give Laura a moment just to like signal another event that's coming up that Thrive is hosting. And Laura, I'll give it and let you take over the mic for this one.
Yeah, thanks. But just very briefly, so for those of you on the call who are either business owners or in HR roles, and you are thinking generally about your culture, we are hosting an event on the 6th of March about how to build workplaces where people do feel valued, supported and connected. So very much tying on for the conversation we've had today. So I've just included a bit of a little link there if anyone's interested to find out more.
Amazing. And we'll be sending the recording of this session and some like recap tips with links and ways you can connect with us afterwards. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.